Hey, what's up? Fish stew is probably not at the top of the list of like most craved foods on YouTube. So today it's my privilege and challenge to try and convince you, the internet, that you should make it as soon as possible. Cioppino is my favorite version of fish stew. It hails from San Francisco and it's tomatoey, bright, briny, and full of tender, sweet seafood and shellfish. It's one of the best tasting things on earth to dip crusty bread into, and aside from the hassle of tracking down some nice, fresh seafood, it's actually really easy to get right. To get started, I'll sort the aromatic vegetable base. For me, the three essentials for a fish stew are garlic, fennel, and onion. I've got half of a white onion here, and I'm going to give it a very small dice. For cioppino, I find that smaller vegetables are better because they melt into the tomatoey broth instead of cling to the cooked fish. A half of a medium onion is going to yield me about 125 grams. Next, I'll cut the fennel into roughly the same size small dice, but first I'm going to cut out the core. If you can't get fresh fennel, I'd say sub in celery here. Just make sure to cut it really small because I don't want to snap into a fibrous veggie when I'm trying to enjoy a tender, succulent shrimp. 75 grams of fennel in total. Then lastly, I'll push 4 to 5 garlic cloves through my garlic press. Once I've got all these aromatics sorted out, I'll grab a heavy bottom pot, in this case my 6.5 quart Dutch oven, and then I'll drop it on the stove over medium heat. Once that's warmed up, I'll add in a very generous squeezer of olive oil, like 3 tablespoons. A little bit more because, olive oil tastes good. Then in goes the white onion, the fennel, the minced garlic, and then a nice big pinch of salt. About a teaspoon's worth. Next, I'll jump in with a spatula and stir everything to combine, and then I'll let these vegetables sweat over gentle medium heat for about 4 to 5 minutes, or until they've lost a good bit of their moisture. While that cooks, I'm gonna grab a medium saucepan, and then I'll grab the shells of about 1 pound's worth of shrimp. We'll get to where the shrimp meats are in just a second, but for now, the shells go into the pot. Next, I'll top those shells with 1 whole box, or about 900 to 1,000 grams worth of chicken stock, and then 1 full bottle, or about 240 milliliters of clam juice. By the way, I'm not using store-bought seafood stock here because, in my opinion, it doesn't taste like seafood at all, and in fact, usually tastes just bad. Now, I'm gonna drop this pot on the stove next to my sweating veggies and cook it at a low simmer until I need it for about 15 to 20 minutes. On the other side of my stove, these veggies have softened just a bit and have released their liquid. So now I'm gonna add a nice pinch of chili flake to bring some fruity heat to the base layer of the stew. I'll stir that in and then keep on cooking for 3 to 4 more minutes. Once the vegetables are softened and translucent and the chili flakes have perfumed the olive oil, I'll add in 200 grams of not bad tasting cheap white wine. I prefer to use Box Chardonnay because it's not expensive, widely available, and good enough. I think being picky about the wine you're gonna boil with onions is insane. Once that wine's up to a simmer, now I'm gonna cook it until it's mostly evaporated or for about 2 to 3 more minutes. When the bubbles are big and the wine is mostly gone, it should leave a trail behind it like this. At this point, the alcohol is fully cooked off, so next, using a strainer, I'm gonna pour in all of my clammy shrimp stock. I'll mention that I didn't boil this very hard, so it didn't really reduce. You'll need about 1,200 grams of liquid for this stew in total, so if you feel like you're short here or yours cooked down, add a few splashes of water or really press on those shells to make sure that you're getting every last drop of stock. Once I've got this stock added into my aromatic base, I'm gonna add 1 28-ounce can or about 800 grams of pureed tomatoes. Personally, I used a can of my favorite whole peeled tomatoes and then just gave them a spin in my blender. If you can find a can of tomato puree that you like the taste of, you can probably save yourself a few dishes and this step, but beware, sometimes tomato puree is tinny and thin tasting. If you want to ensure that you have the best tomato flavor here, just use a nice can of whole peels and then puree them yourself. Once the tomato puree is stirred in, I'm going to bring this entire pot up to a rolling boil and then reduce it for about 12 to 15 minutes. This is going to soften the veggies completely, which I want, and it will also concentrate the broth. While that cooks down, I'm going to head over to the fridge to pull out the fish part of this fish stew. My version of cioppino has 4 ocean-based proteins: 1 pound of mussels, 1 pound of Atlantic cod, 1 pound of Gulf shell-on wild shrimp, and a ½ pound of squid tubes and tentacles. I picked these 4 proteins specifically because they're all pretty forgiving in terms of cook time, and at least in the United States, they're pretty easy to get your hands on. For the cod, I really prefer that it's fresh and from the Atlantic. In contrast to Pacific cod, Atlantic cod is firm, sweet, and just more flavorful in my opinion. To prep it for the pot, I'll cut it into 3 strips lengthwise, and if you can't get cod, by the way, you could sub in haddock or halibut, or if you're really strapped, salmon would work as well. Then I'll cut those strips into nice large chunks that are about 1 inch on each side. One of the things that you really need to be aware of when you're cooking cod is that it flakes like frickin' freaking crazy. So one of the two things that I'm doing to keep it together is salting it ahead of time. A heaping tablespoon for this 1 pound fillet is going to help this flesh firm up and make it less prone to crumble and flake when I stir it in the pot. Behind the cod, I'll clean up some shrimps. Again, this was 1 pound's worth of shell-on wild Gulf shrimp. To deshell it, I'll use my handy kitchen scissors here and cut them down the back. From there, I'll peel open the backside, revealing the spine of poop in there that we call a vein. Then I'll carefully peel off the shell, making sure to squeeze the tail so everything comes out in one firm piece. Farmed Asian shrimp would work instead of wild here, by the way. They just have a snappier, more hot doggy texture that I don't love as much as wild. For the squid, I bought what's called tubes and tentacles, about a ½ pound's worth. I cut the white tube portion into nice rings like this, and then if there's any super large tentacle sections, you can just cut those in half. If you can't find calamari here, you could sub an octopus or an additional shellfish like clams. Speaking of shellfish, most of, but not all of this 1 pound of mussels have what's called a beard sticking out of the side like this. That's super gritty. So I'm going to run these mussels under some cold water to rinse them off and then just tear off any beardy bits that are sticking out of the side. And oh yeah, if there's any mussels that are cracked or broken, definitely get rid of those because eating dead mussels can create a pretty dire butt situation that you'll definitely want to avoid. Once my fish and shellfish are all cleaned up and ready for the pot, I'll check back on said pot. It's been about 15 minutes and my tomato broth has reduced by 15 to 20%. And at this point, I'm going to give it a thorough taste for seasoning. I think this needs some more shimmer, so I'm going to give it a healthy dose of salt and then a very small pinch of sugar, but just a tiny bit, like a 1/4 teaspoon. All I'm looking to do here is to balance out some of the overt acidity from the tomato. I'll stir that in and then give it one more taste. This time it's right on. It's robust, it's balanced, and a little bit briny from the shrimp and clam stock. Now I'm going to turn the heat down to low so that I can very gently cook these fragile fish meats. First, in goes my cod, then all of my shrimp, then my squid, and once that's all laid in, I'll come back and gently make sure everything is spread out evenly and fully submerged. If the fish gets clumped up at all, we'll get raw spots, and obviously that's not good. Lastly, in goes all of my cleaned up mussels, and then I'll make sure to get those submerged as well. Now I'll bring the pot up to a very, very gentle simmer, and then I'll drop on the lid and poach everything carefully for 3 to 4 minutes. While that simmers, I'm going to quickly thank the sponsor of this video, Established Titles. Established Titles lets you buy land in Scotland by the square foot. Why would you want to do that? Well, the historical tradition in Scotland is that if you own your own land, you're officially a lord or a lady. Together with my cat Kiku, now I own 1 square foot of dedicated land in Edelston, Scotland. My official title is now Lord Brian Thomas Lagerstrom I, and I present to you Lady Kiku Marie Aderman Lagerstrom. Hey Kiku, how do you love being a lady? It's dope, I love it. Kiku especially loves knowing the exact plot number of our land listed right here on the certificate. That way we know the exact location of our plot in Scotland. And Established Titles plants a tree with every order, so it's a really fun way to help preserve the picturesque woodlands and biodiversity of Scotland while also supporting global reforestation efforts. Making somebody a lord or lady is actually a really great gift too. So instead of getting your mom that lame candle for her birthday, now you could make her a lady in Scotland. Lady Mom. She could change her name legally and put it on her credit cards and all of her travel documents, and she would be very stoked. Right now, Established Titles is running a great Labor Day sale, and when you use the link in my description and code Brian Lagerstrom, you'll get an additional 10% off. After 3 to 4 minutes at a bare simmer, I'm going to pop off the lid. I'll come back with a spat now to very, very, very gently stir this to get any remaining raw fish meat in contact with the hot broth. Just don't stir too much because the cod will flake into oblivion. To gauge fish doneness here, I like to use the mussels as a barometer because it takes roughly the same amount of time for those to open as it does to gently poach the shrimp, squid, and cod. These aren't fully open yet, so the lid goes back on. I'm going to poach these for 2 more minutes. After 6 to 8 minutes in total of gentle poaching, the mussels are fully opened and the shrimp, cod, and squid are nicely opaque. Now to plate this up, I'm going to drop 4 to 5 ladles worth into a nice warmed deep bowl. I like to get the cod, squid, and shrimp in the bowl first, then garnish those with some black pepper, minced parsley, and then some fresh green tasting olive oil. And then to finish, I'll snug 4 to 5 mussels up into the broth and call it done. You guys, the broth. It's so deeply flavored like the sea. It's tomatoey and robust and round, and texturally it's got a ton of body, but it's still slurpable. And thanks to the gentle poach on all that seafood and lack of stirring, all of the proteins in this stew are tender, sweet, and intact. And they're not rubbery at all, especially not the squid. But By far, the most exciting bite for me in this entire stew is always the broth-soaked crusty sourdough bread. The stew is not complete without it, and it's almost the entire point of making it. In fact, I think of it mostly as a brothy dip for sourdough bread, and maybe the best thing on earth to dip bread into. Cioppino tastes good, and I really hope you try it soon. Let's eat this thing.